All right. Good evening, everyone. We are sponsored this week by Rabbi and Evelyn Kasasi in honor of the engagement of Dora Ilana and Joy Brescher. It's a lovely couple. Chaim is for tonight. Beautiful, beautiful. He's from Los Angeles. Now they're both from Los Angeles. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Yehuda Greenberg. B'schus Refuah Shlema for Mercedes Bas Miriam. And Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by the Kahal Yereim Daf Yomi crew. B'schus Refuah Shlema for Beilu Yentel Bas Chaya Rachel. We are on the fourth line, Yud Zayin Amud Beis. And we were amidst a very interesting brisa of Shmuel, where Shimon, who interpreted a pasuk in a very interesting way, not in its chronological order, but he reordered the items on the list according to their severity, and then derived from a kal v'chomer each item being more severe than the previous one. So it started off with Meiser, right? That the tithes that were supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and you're not allowed to eat that outside of Yerushalayim. And then we said, well, then from there we know that Bikurim, the first fruits, also can't be eaten in Yerushalayim. Why? Because that's more strict than the tithes, than the second tithes that have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. And therefore, what's the purpose of the pasuk? We added a new law. Then we went to the next one and we had a new law. And then we added the next one, we added a new law. And that's how he interpreted the pasuk. And then Rava said, what an amazing, everybody should have children just like Shimon. Everybody's mother should have children just like them, except that the whole shot is all wrong. Other than that, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, except for that it's not correct. So now we're going to go through and figure out why it's all wrong. Okay, we're going to go through each one of them at a time, and we're going to explain why each one is all wrong. So, my chumra de bikurim mimaiser. The first one is that we started off by saying that just like the tithes, we said that have to be eaten inside the walls of Yerushalayim, so too we clearly understand from a kal v'chomer that the first fruits also have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Therefore, why do we have to have the first fruits for a different rule? So now, what makes maser, what makes the tithes more severe than, what makes the first fruits more severe than meiser? Shekain asurim lezorim, because first fruits have to be eaten by kohanim, and the tithes are eaten by everybody. So therefore, you see that the first fruits are more severe. The problem is,
what if you don't have any kohanim?
You can't eat it, right? No, without first fruits, without any kohanim, then nobody eats it, right? That's why we don't bring them anymore nowadays. Adrabah, but the reverse could also be true. Meiser chamor, you could say that there's an element of stringency by the tithes, shekain aser la'onein, because somebody who is an oning, that means somebody whose relative has passed away and has not yet been buried, they're usually exempt from mitzvos. But a kohen is allowed to eat bikurim when he's in a status of being an onain, which is not the case. Somebody who is an onain, somebody's in this status of being, when somebody's relative passed away, does not do mitzvos. One of the mitzvos he cannot do is eat the Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim.
I think that's why you don't do mitzvah till the Levaya.
That's correct, right? You don't do mitzvos till the Levaya. So therefore, Meiser seems more stringent than Bikurim. Okay, so the next one is my chumra de toda ushlamim mi meiser. Then we said that the toda offerings and the shlamim offerings are more stringent than the tithe offerings. Why is that? Shekain tonin matan damim veimurin legabe mizbeach. Because these sacrifices, the Thanksgiving sacrifice and the peace offering, they are brought on a sacrifice, on an altar, whereas the meiser, the tithe, is not brought on a sacrifice. But Adrabah, who says that's the way to look at it, you should also look at it this way. Meiser chamor, the tithe is more stringent. Shekain to'onin kesef tsura. When you have the produce, that's the second tithes, you can redeem it if it's too hard to carry all of it to Yerushalayim. The pasuk says specifically by these second tithes that in order to redeem it, it has to be redeemed on currency. Not simply redeem it on something that has the value of currency. It actually has to be currency, meaning it has to be a coin with a stamp on it, indicating that it's the currency of the land. If it's just a plain slug, if it's just a piece of gold, that you can't redeem it on. Whereas that's not the case when it comes to sacrifice. When it comes to sacrifices, a redemption of a sacrifice can be done on anything that has a value of money. Once it gets a blemish, you can then redeem that item, the sacrifice, onto something that has the value of money, and then use that to purchase a new sacrifice.
Like a coin stamp or signature or something.
No, more like a piece of gold, a gold bar or something, right? It doesn't have to be stamped as a coin. So therefore, you can see that in some ways, Meiser is more stringent. Then we said that the firstborn is more severe than the Toda and the Shlomim than the Thanksgiving offering and the peace offering. Shegain kedusha so merechem, because the firstborn is holy before, as soon as it's born, right? As soon as it comes out of the mother, firstborn animal is already holy and is already considered for a sacrifice. Whereas these other sacrifices, they have to be designated. The animal must be designated for sacrifice later. So it shows you that they are less severe as the firstborn. But Adirabba, the reverse could also be true. Toda ushlamim chamurim, the Thanksgiving offering, the peace offering could be more severe. Shekein toanim smicha unesachim utnuvas chazav ashok. There are elements to the service that only apply to the peace offering and the Thanksgiving offering that do not apply to the firstborn offering. For example, the owner of the sacrifice has to lean on the Thanksgiving offering and on the peace offering. He also has to bring wine and oil together with the offering, which is not the case by the firstborn offering. And also parts of it, the breast piece of the breast and the front leg are waved by the Kohen and the owner, and all of those parts of the service don't exist by the firstborn. So in some ways, the Thanksgiving offering, the peace offering, are more strict than the firstborn offering. Then we said that the sin offering and the guilt offering were more severe than the firstborn offering. Why is that? Because they are holy of holy offerings. Remember, we discussed that sacrifices can be categorized into two levels. There are those that are holy of holies, like the sin offerings and the chatos and the asham, the guilt offering. Whereas when it comes to firstborn offerings or a shlama peace offering or Thanksgiving offerings, those have lesser status of holiness, in that they can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, whereas the sin offering and the guilt offering have to be eaten inside the Beis HaMikdash. So they're kodshei kodshim, and there's other elements there to the rules as well. We'll get to them when we get to Maseches Zvachim to learn all the distinctions between kodshei kodshim and kodshei kalim, who owns them, what happens when they get a blemish, various different issues. Adirabba, but the reverse could be true. Bechor chamor, the firstborn could be more strict. Shekin kedusha so merechem, because as we said, the firstborn is holy as soon as it's born, and that is not the case by an animal designated for a sin offering or a guilt offering. Sin offering and guilt offering have to be animals that are designated later on at some future point. So therefore, maybe those are less severe. What is the stringency that a burnt offering has over a sin offering and a guilt offering? Because the sin offering, the burnt offering is so holy that nobody eats it. So it has to be burnt, right? That's what makes it more severe. Yeah, but Adarabba, the reverse is true. Maybe the sin offering and the guilt offering are more stringent. Shekain mechapri, because they can provide an atonement for somebody who does a sin, and an olah cannot provide atonement. So therefore, the kulahu and all of them, chamiri me ola, any one of these other things, you can say ola is the most severe of all of them. Any one of these other types of offerings and cases could be more severe more strict than an ola. Di'isbehu shtei achilos, because all of those are consumed by both the sacrificial altar and also by a person. And an ola only can be consumed by you're looking and going, oh, because it's burnt, it's so much holy. Maybe it's the reverse. Maybe the fact that it gets consumed by the altar and by a person makes it more holy. So therefore, what you see is the whole basis of Rabbi Shimon's droshos is that there's a hierarchy of all of these mitzvos. One is more stringent than the other, one is more stringent. And what Rava just did is he knocked a hole in every single one of them. There's no way of looking at any of these mitzvos. They all have independent characteristics to them. There's no way of looking at one of them and saying it's stricter than the other one. So therefore, that is not the case. So therefore, his drosh doesn't work. So Ella mai diyalda imei, Rabbi Shimon. So why does he make such a fuss over saying that everybody's mother should have children like Rabbi Shimon if his drosh was completely wrong? So why does he say that? He says was so clever what he did, which is to rearrange the order of the pasuk by taking a look through all of the mitzvos, figuring out what is stricter than which one, and then reordering it in such a way to be able to set this up. That took a lot of intelligence, a lot of smarts. It wasn't right, but the whole methodology and approach there was very brilliant. Therefore, it's worthwhile to have kids that are smart like that. So that's what he meant. Now, he respected the efforts. Now, problem is, v'chimaz hirin min adin. Well, the whole Rabbi Shimon's other premise is flawed as well. And that is that we were deriving a prohibition that ultimately led to Makkos based on a kal v'chomer. In every single one. We knocked off the kal v'chomers, but originally Rabbi Shimon had a kal v'chomer. He said, this one's more stringent than this one, and if you get Makkos by this one, you definitely get Makkos by this one. Well, problem with that is, we said that we don't derive punishments. We don't derive los ases from kal v'chomers. Right, we said that already. So and afilu leman da'amar onshin min adin. Even though we don't hold this way, but there was an opinion that said we can derive punishments from a kal v'chomer, even though we said we can't. Right? Let's see, even according to the opinion that said you could. Ein mazhirin min adin. So they definitely agree you can't come up with a new avera from a kal v'chomer. Right? That for sure you can't do. You might be able to figure out once something is already usher what the punishment is from a kal v'chomer, but you can't come up and decide this is more prohibited than that based on a kal v'chomer. So, therefore, what was Rabbi Shimon saying? Isura bi'alma. He wasn't telling you that all of those cases received malchus and received lashes. Rather, he was just telling you each one of these is just prohibited. Yes.
What's a kal v'chomer?
Kal v'chomer is a logical deduction by saying that when one thing which is less strict, that's the rule, then the thing that's more strict, for sure that's the case. Right. So, for example, right, if it says 40 kilometers per hour and I'm driving 80, I can get a ticket. Kal v'chomer, if it's a 20 and I'm driving 80, for sure I'll get a ticket. Right. That's how a kal v'chomer works. Right. The case that's more stringent, the 20 kilometer per hour zone is more stringent than the 40. Therefore, if I'm going to get a ticket for driving 80 in the 40, I'll for sure get one in the 20. That's the idea.
So you're in big trouble if you drive 80 through a school zone.
That is correct. Okay. I would not recommend it. Right. Okay. So now,
sorry.
Val. The problem with rewriting what Rabbi Shimon said and saying that each one of his prohibitions is simply a prohibition, and it was not intended to tell me that each one had malchus is. Rava said Zar she'achol min ha'ola lifnei zreika, that he had on his list somebody who's a non-Kohen who eats from an ola. Okay, I'm going to count up all the averos that this is one of these exercises that's a lot of fun, right? He's a non-Kohen. He eats a korban. An ola, which shouldn't be eaten, lifnei zreika, which he eats before the blood is sprinkled, chutz lechoma, with outside of the wall, which means he's eating it outside of the...
Was he observant?
Well, clearly not. What makes somebody observant? He's keeping the laws. This guy is violating 5 prohibitions in one shot, right? He's eating this kochim outside of the Beis Hamikdash courtyard. He's eating it outside of Yerushalayim. He's not a Kohen. He's eating an ola, right? And he's eating it before they sprinkled the blood. 5 different prohibitions, all simultaneously with this one act. And Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, lo kechamesh, he's going to get 5 sets of lashes. But wait a second. You just told me that Rabbi Shimon never intended to give me lashes for all of these crimes. It was just now that we decided it couldn't be a kal v'chomer, couldn't figure out, you can't make an azhara. It was just to tell me that they were prohibited, but not to actually punish me with malchus. So what do you mean that you're going to get 5 sets of malchus? You wouldn't get 5 sets of lashes for it. So the answer is you got to change what Rava said, and you have to make it chamisha isurin, even though that's a little bit, we call this dochek, right? There's a non-simple explanation. It's not the best way, because Rava, who is an Amora, and he's precise with his language, wouldn't have said lashes if he didn't mean lashes, but he means not lashes, he means that you get 5 prohibitions. That's essentially true. So it's chamisha isurin havu. V'ha'anan tnan, but 1 second. We had our Mishnah, and our Mishnah says, Eluhein alokin. These are the people who get lashes. We're on Yud Chesam and Aleph. So therefore, in one of the list, you take a look at who's on the list of people who get lashes. And we said somebody who eats first fruit before you read the psukim. And that was on Rabbi Shimon's list, that he derived from a kal v'chomer. So how can you get lashes based on the kal v'chomer? Ella, so rather, kroy yiserahu, rather what happens is like this. The whole pasuk, it's not a kal v'chomer drasha. It sounds like he's making a kal v'chomer, but it's not. What he's doing is the whole pasuk is really extra. Every one of those phrases is a separate limud in itself. Okay? So how does it work? Michti, let's take a look. Ksiv, the pasuk says, Ve'veis Hashem, ve'achaltu lifnei Hashem elokecha b'makom. So you're supposed to bring the Meiser Sheni, the second tithe, there, and you're supposed to eat it there in front of Hashem in that place. So lichtov rachmana lo tuchal ochlam. Then the pasuk goes through and lists all of these other items, the bikurim, the ola, the chatas, all these other lists that Rabbi Shimon brought, and it doesn't need to list them. All it should say is also you should eat them too. right? It should say them. That doesn't have to list all of them. So mehadr mefarish burachmana lomali. So why does the Torah have to go through and list each one of them separately? Ella lichudi lahu lave lekol chad v'chad. To tell me that there's a lo saseh associated with each and every one. Now, what's interesting about this is that at the end of the day, you don't have all the lo sasehs that we thought we had, right? And that's just to point out. We have the lo saseh of don't eat it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, because that's the outside of the walls, outside the city. That we have because we learned that from Meiser. Okay. Then each one of these other prohibitions, I'm going to learn that I can't eat bikurim without reading the psukim. Okay. But what if? And I have to learn that I can't eat the toda and the shlomim out before sprinkling the blood. Right. But what if so each one of those prohibitions, each one of those items is also the lo saseh. Right. So, but there are other things that were in between that are not included. The other lo sasehs that are not necessarily included, like ola, we're not allowed to eat it at all. But what if you ate it and you ate it outside of the walls of Yerushalayim?
Makkos.
I'm sorry, you would not get Makkos, right? If you ate outside of the Azar, because you would not get Makkos for that, because there's no pasuk that tells me that. Right. In the end of the day, that came from a kal v'chomer. That's just a regular lo saseh that you don't get lashes for. Came from a kal v'chomer, so that you can't get lashes for it. But eating the ola, you get lashes for. Eating it outside of the walls, you can get lashes for, but not for all of those things. So just to point out that now that we've interpreted it a different way.
The fact that you're not eating lashes, wouldn't the punishment to be a little more severe because you're eating it outside of the premises?
But the point is you can't derive the lashes from the severity, right? That's the whole point, right? You're right, it is more severe. But you can't make a derivation of lashes based on the fact that it's more severe. You need a pasuk. And the pasuk only tells me, number one, don't eat it outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, and number two, don't eat it at all.
Well, if don't eat it at all, already you're over.
Yeah.
Like you said.
You're not getting away, right? No, that's not from Kal V'chomer. That's from the fact that the pasuk says don't eat it that don't eat it there in Ola. Didn't have to say in Ola. Why? Because you just said don't eat them. That would have been sufficient. Every one of those extra phrases is to tell me a separate new isser that applies.
One set of lashes.
Yes.
Right.
For eating it. Well, and now if you
eating it, stop.
Right. Correct.
How many lashes? 40?
40. Yeah. We're going to see 39. But hang on, pretty good. It's good. All right.
Yeah. Wow.
It's good.
Cheers, Rabbi. You taught me something.
All right, good. Yod Ches Amud Aleph. We are now 4 lines down. Gufa. 5 lines down. Gufa. Amar Rava. Rava says as follows. Zar she'achal min ha'olah lifnei zrika. So Rava had said that a non-Kohen who eats from an olah, right? That's already he's non-Kohen. Right. He's eating an olah as the burnt offering. Nobody's allowed to eat that at all. Lifnei zrika, he eats it before you sprinkle the blood, which is another prohibition. Chutz lechoma, outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, another prohibition. And he's eating it outside of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, which is another prohibition. Rabbi Shimon lo kechamesh. Rabbi Shimon says, we said 5 prohibitions. Okay, right. 5 prohibitions. What about, there are other things that he did wrong. Velilki nami mishum v'zar lo yochal ki kodesh heim. Why also does he not also get a lashes for the prohibition? Another time that the pasuk says, Zar should not eat anything that is kodesh. Not just an olah that's prohibited, but also anything that is kodesh. So the answer to that is, because honey mili, that pasuk applies, Heicha de kohanim chazi. That only applies to other sacrificial meats that a Kohen is allowed to eat. That says that when a Kohen is allowed to eat it, a non-Kohen may not. Hacha, this olah, this burnt offering, to la kohanim nami lo chazi, a Kohen cannot eat it, so therefore that avera does not apply.
I just understand, why is this true like told us in Shabbos? Like, if you cannot eat it, then that's it. Everything else falls under that same concept, whether you eat it here, whether you eat it there, whether it's before Zari, like, do you know what I mean? It's
number one, Shabbos is a way whole different ball game altogether than any other type of averos, right? You can't derive other, right? There's a whole Torah Shabbal Peh on every one of those.
Right, but it just seems like svara to like not.
Well, what's the svara here? The
svara is if you can't eat it, like I don't need to be punished. Also, you ate it, you're not allowed to eat it.
1 second. Yesterday we just said we can say somebody's violating 5 prohibitions for eating an ant. Right? So that means every time the pasuk tells you don't do something, then even if you do one thing, right? We had the example of somebody, a Kohen Gadol, who marries a woman who was widowed and a divorced woman. She's one person, but she's two things. So you can see when he marries her, he's violating two prohibitions.
But then all of these things are always cumulated the Rabbi meaning.
As far as the based in punishment is concerned, right? The based in punishment is concerned, unless you're Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir allowed you to get multiple sets of lashes
for the same crime.
For the same crime. But you're right. But that's not the issue. The issue that we're going to count as number of korbanos. We're doing an exercise in counting up the number of averos.
Right. No, I understand.
Right. That's the exercise here. Right. So this avera of vizar lo yochal ki kodesh heim does not apply. That's why. Velil kinami. What about the other violation of the prohibition? Ubasar bisada treifa lo tochelu, that the meat in the field of a treifa you shall not eat. That is telling me that whenever meat, this is a rule that whenever something goes out of its place that it's supposed to be located, it becomes prohibited to be eaten. Okay. So therefore, if you've got sacrificial meat that gets taken out of Yerushalayim, it is now prohibited to eat it.
Right.
Okay, and that's what this guy did. He had an ola, can't leave the Beis HaMikdash area. It left the Beis HaMikdash area, so he's in violation of this avera too. So why not get this? Kevan sheyotza basar chutz lemechitzaso nasar. Once it leaves the walls of Yerushalayim, so it becomes prohibited. So the answer is hani mili heicha debefnim chazi hachab debefnim nami lo chazi. So he says this is also another circumstance where the prohibition applies when it would have been eligible to be eaten had it remained inside the walls. And therefore, since it went outside the walls, it became prohibited. This ola was not permitted to be eaten inside the walls in the first place. Therefore, the prohibition of don't eat it outside the walls does not apply.
Right.
Okay? Velil kinami the Rabbi Eliezer. Why doesn't he get lashes also like the avera that Rabbi Eliezer says? Damar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo yochal ki kodesh. Don't eat it because it is holy. Yud chasam beis. Kol shebe kodesh pasol. So tells us that anything that is kodesh, right? It is don't eat it because it is left. It is nosar. He says, so this is it's nosar food, right? So that's what he says. It's nosar. So that's kol shebekodesh pasol. So this is coming to tell me, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this prohibition, I'm not sure where the prohibition lies.
Where is it?
This is the pasuk says lo yochal ki kodesh. You shall not eat it because it is holy. This pasuk is talking about that the leftover meat from a korban to the next day, you should not eat it because it's nosar. Right. And this pasuk is telling me, I think this is what it's saying, is this pasuk is telling me that any item which is prohibited, there's a lo saseh to eat anything which is an invalidated sacrifice. And so therefore, because it's leftover meat, you cannot eat it. So therefore, since this ola is an invalid sacrifice, so too, you're going to get an extra lo saseh for eating it. That's how I think that they're wording it. So therefore, it's an invalid sacrifice because it's an ola, and you took it outside of its place. So it becomes an invalid sacrifice. And therefore, since it's an invalid sacrifice, you cannot eat it. If you eat it, you're in violation. So, hani mi lihecha dekodim poslo chazi. So the answer is, that also doesn't apply, because that would only apply to a sacrifice where, before it was, whatever happened to it became puzzle, it was valid to eat. Then it became puzzle. Now you have a prohibition, don't eat it. Okay? It was a valid sacrifice. You left it over to the morning. Now you may not eat it. Okay? By leaving it over the morning. This, however, this sacrifice, dekodem poslo, nami lo chazi. Before you took it out of the walls of Yerushalayim, it was an ola, and you couldn't eat it anyway. So therefore, this issur doesn't apply to this again. Okay, v'lilkin nami k'de'idach to Rabbi Eliezer. What about the other statement that Rabbi Eliezer makes? The Tanya we're in a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Kol shehu bekalil tiyah litin lo saseh alachi laso." Anytime, right? This pasuk says that the pasuk says that by an ola you're supposed to burn it up completely,
right.
And this is what we call a lav, that a lo saseh that comes from an aseh. From the fact that there's a positive commandment that says you have to burn it up completely, we know there's a negative commandment not to eat it, right? You have to burn it. You cannot eat it. So Normally, we say that that's not chayav malchus for that kind of an avera, but Rabbi, we're suggesting that according to this shita, such a thing would be. And we don't answer that as the answer. We say inachinami. You're right. That would be an extra avera that he's in violation of. Rava mehai krokamer. What was Rava saying? Rava was saying that you are in violation of 5 averos from this one pasuk. Right? He wasn't counting. There could be other averos that you're violating. That's true. He's not worried about the other averos. He just thought it was interesting to note that the one pasuk that Rabbi Shimon used and listed all of those things, you could be in violation from 5 different averos from that one pasuk. Amar of Gidol, Amar Rav. So did I mention we're on Yud Chesam base?
Yes.
Good. I forgot whether I did. Amar of Gidol, Amar Rav. Rav Gidol, Yehud makes me nervous. Amar of Gidol goes to the same Rav. Kohen she'achol mechatos ve'asham lifnei zreka. Let's say a kohen who eats from a korban chatos or a guilt offering before the blood is sprinkled.
Right.
Loka, he gets lashes. My time. What's the reason? Damar kro. The pasuk says va'achlu osam asher kupar bahem, that you can eat them those sacrifices that had an atonement. Meaning, achar kapara in, after these sacrifices bring an atonement, and the atonement occurs when the blood is sprinkled, then you can eat them. Lifnei kapara lo, but not before, right? So before the blood is sprinkled, there's a prohibition, you may not eat them. So the problem is, this is a lava b'mikolase, lavu. So this says that it is according to this opinion, we're saying that there is a lo sase. The positive is that you should eat it after the blood is sprinkled.
Right.
That creates an implied lo sase of don't eat it before the blood is sprinkled. But it doesn't say there's a lo sase. So therefore, this opinion is saying that an implied lo sase also can get lashes. Not everybody agrees to that, but that's according to this opinion.
The fact that it doesn't say, do assume it's lo sasek, even though...
That's what this opinion is suggesting.
But does that mean he could eat it before it's sprinkled and eventually, as long as you sprinkle it?
No.
Well, once you ate it,
It's
a lavanita classe is what you're
Right.
suggesting. It's already eaten. You can't fix it now.
I mean, you could partially
It's
eat it. If you partially eat it. If you don't completely eat it.
Well, then the rest of it you can still eat.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's until it's completely finished being eaten. That would be where...
Yeah, but you can't undo the kazayas that you already ate. Right? You got an avera for eating kazayas.
Right, but you can still sprinkle prior to
Eating the rest of it.
Right.
Fine. So then you wouldn't be chayav for eating the next kazayas, but you're chayav eating for that kazayas. You can't undo the kazayas that you ate.
You cannot do what's already been done.
No, I understand. I'm trying to think of like the divorce. You weren't allowed to get divorced, but you got divorced, but you're still allowed to get back to marry.
Because the prohibition there was you cannot remain in a status of not being married, which can be fixed by being married. You can't uneat this. You ate it. You can be divorced.
Okay, fine. I hear you.
Right? There's a difference. I can remove the eggs having been taken with the mother on it by chasing the mother away.
Right.
But once I eat the eggs, then I can't do that anymore.
You can't uneat the eggs. I understand. Okay, fine. The difference is you could put it back to status quo.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mesiv Rava. Rava says, "V'chol behemas mafreses parsha v'shosel shesa." Is it last week's parsha? Already last week's parsha, right? All of the animals that have split hooves and they chew their cud, right? You're an expert on this now, right? Right. So then that's shtei prosos malas gera babehema oso tochelu. Right, those are the animals that they chew their they chew their cud. They have the split hooves. Those you can eat. Also tachelu, which means those you should eat. Vein behema acheres tochelu. You cannot eat other animals, and therefore there should be a lo sase there. Right? Positive commandment is eat these. Implied negative commandment is don't eat these. Now, if what you're saying is true, that there's an implied lo sase, and we get lashes for that, as zelo tochu lamali, why do I need the pasuk that follows, which says, and these are the animals you shall not eat? I don't need a pasuk that tells me what I should not eat. Once you give me the positive, I already know the implied negative.
Right.
Ella, so rather, itmar hachi itmar. This is what you have to say. Amar of Gidol Amar Rav, this is what Rav Gidol say Rav. Zar she'achol mechatos ve'asham lifnei zreka, potter. A non-Kohen who eats the korban chatas or a korban asham before the blood is sprinkled is potter. He is exempt from lashes. My taima, why should that be? To Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, "V'achlu osam asher kupar bahem." You have to eat them. The Kohen is supposed to eat them after you get a kapara. Kol heicha de karinan bei ve'achlu osam asher kupar bahem karinan bei. Whenever the pasuk says that you can eat them, that's when you get an atonement for them. The zar.
You originally hear that you're not allowed to eat it before it gets sprinkled?
That's what we say, right? But that's not the point that we're trying to make here. We're trying to make the point that we are saying that you can't, that what point does this korban become valid? The korban becomes valid once the blood is sprinkled. Right. Now, that means before it's sprinkled, it's not a valid korban. And what is the avera that a non-Kohen has to eat? V'zar lo yochel kodesh. A zar is not allowed to eat, a non-Kohen is not allowed to eat a valid korban. Hence, hence, right, by logical derivation, right, if a korban is not considered a valid korban until after you sprinkle the blood, and a zar is not liable, a non-Kohen is not liable until he eats a valid korban, that means if he ate the korban before the blood was sprinkled, which would be a violation for a Kohen. Right. But he's a non-Kohen, he hasn't violated a prohibition because he has not eaten a valid korban. Good?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Good. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Mordechai. Bikurim, okay, when it comes to the first fruits, hanacha me'akeves bahen. The requirement is to take your basket of fruits to Yerushalayim, first fruits, and you have to put the basket of fruits next to the altar, right, next to the mizbeach. When you do that, then you fulfilled your obligation of bringing your first fruits. Kriya, reading, then there's a paragraph you have to say, right? Arami Yovi, and I got all these fruits, and Hashem took me into Eretz Yisrael, and right, but reading that ain't makevas behen. If you don't do that, you've still fulfilled your mitzvah. Lechatchila, you're supposed to do that, but you don't do it, you're still yotzei. Omi Amar Rabbi Elazar, did Rabbi Elazar really say that? Amar Rabbi Elazar, didn't Rabbi Elazar say? Amar Rabbi and then Rabbi Hoshaya, Hifrish bikurim kodem lechag. Okay, now you're supposed to bring bikurim between Shavuos and Sukkos. Once Shavuos comes, that's the beginning of first fruit season. Then comes Sukkos, that's the end of first fruit season. You can still bring your first fruits if you didn't do it all the way until Hanukkah. However, the difference is, after Sukkos, you don't recite the paragraph of Arami Oved Avi. Right. Now, let's say this fellow separated the fruit out before Sukkos. So the fruit is obligated in reciting those paragraphs. Okay? The Avar Alei Anachag, but he forgot them at home when it came to be Sukkos. He left them at home. So now, Yirkevu, he cannot bring them afterwards. Because what's he supposed to do? If he brings them afterwards, he can't recite the paragraph anymore. And he can't bring these in because these were set aside before Sukkos, so they're under an obligation to be read. 1 second. Ma'alav mishum lo matzi mikri alehem. So isn't the reason why you have to let these fruits rot is because he's not going to be able to read the psukim now because it's after Sukkos. Okay?
But these, not a waste, then you're rot?
It is a waste.
No?
No, it is not, but you're thinking of it's Baltashchis, but it's not a Baltashchis because it's like saying, I can't eat this non-kosher food, right? If it's non-kosher, I can't eat it, right? This is fruit, thank you, that I cannot use. Now, 1 second. If you're telling me that reading the paragraph doesn't ruin it if I bring it, then amai yirkavu. Then why is it that I can't just bring the fruit? I understand it was obligated. I was supposed to say it before Sukkos. But if I didn't say it before Sukkos, then it would still be valid. So why can't I bring it after Sukkos and not say it? Right? What's the problem? So the answer is, Kid Rabbi Zera, it's like Rabbi Zera says, Dam Rabbi Zera, Kol haroy libila ein bila ma'keves bo. We have a principle. There is a large utensil in the Beis HaMikdash. It holds 60 saw. Cannot hold 60 saw.
It's measurement,
right? About 1.5 liters or something like that. Can't hold more than 60, right? If I put more than 60 in it, and then I put the water and the oil in there, I can't mix it up, right? Because it's going to spill over the side. So therefore, it's not going to mix well. Okay. If somebody pledges and says, "I want to bring 61," you got to bring it in 2 separate containers. That's how that rule works. Okay. Now, what happens if I bring my sacrifice and I don't mix it up all that well? Is the sacrifice valid? The answer is yes. So 1 second. If I don't have to mix it up all that well, then why do I need to be in a container that is so large that I can mix it up? The answer is that the rule is that you have to be able to mix it up even if you don't actually mix it up. You have to be in a situation where such a thing would be possible. So that's the same thing here. The fruit has to, even though I can bring it and not read it, and not read the paragraph, I have to bring it in a circumstance where I could read it. So if I brought this after Sukkot and I cannot read it, now it becomes invalid. Right? The fact that I read it the fact that I don't read it doesn't invalidate it. But the fact that I can't read it, that invalidates it. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. So because I could read it, right? Basically, I have to have the ability to read it to not invalidate it.
Yes.
So if I forget, it's still good.
Yeah.
But because I forgot it at home, and I would have to bring it after Sukkot.
And now I can't read it because it's after Sukkot.
Right.
That now it's invalid. That's correct. Now v'chol she'eino roy lebila, anything if I put my meal, my flour in a utensil that I can't mix it well in bila ma'keves, then the fact that I cannot mix it ruins the sacrifice. Rav Acha bar Yaakov masni lo k'Rabbi Asi. Rav Acha bar Yaakov taught it like Rav Asi. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. V'kashulei. I just lost my place. V'kashulei de Rabbi Yochanan, another Rabbi Yochanan. And now we have a contradiction between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan bikurim hanacha ma'keves. He says, 1 second. Did Rabbi Yochanan say that bikurim is, right, as we started off with, that bikurim, putting it next to the mizbeach is critical? Did he say that? That bikurim hanacha ma'keves bahen, kriya ein ma'keves bahen, but the reading is not necessary bahen? But didn't Rav Asi ask Rabbi Yochanan the following question? Bikurim me'emasai mutarin lekohanim. At what point is the bikurim permissible for the kohanim to eat them? And he said, haru'uyin likriya. So those fruits that are permissible, that are required to have the psukim read, i.e. before sukkos, misha kara aleihin, once you read the psukim. V'she'ein ru'yin l'kriya, and if you brought these fruits after Sukkot, and therefore they're not obligated to be read, misharo pnei habayis. So then, as soon as they walk into the Beis Hamikdash, as soon as you bring the utensil into the Beis Hamikdash, then they are now consecrated as bikurim. So kasha kriya, kasha hanacha hanacha. So this is a contradiction, because on the one hand, Rabbi Yochanan is alleged to have stated that putting it near the mizbeach is what is required, and not the kriya. And then on the other hand, we have this new statement of Rabbi Yochanan that says that if it was required to be read, I need to read it. And then he says, then if it doesn't require to be read, just bringing it into the Beis Hamikdash is enough to sanctify it. So that's not what Rabbi Yochanan says. He's contradicting himself. So kriya lo kasha. So as far as the reading is concerned, it's not a contradiction. Ha Rabbi Shimon, ha Rabbanan. This is Rabbi Yochanan is explaining the opinion of Shimon versus the Rabbanan. It's not, he's explaining two different viewpoints. And hanacha nami lo kasha. And as far as putting it down versus putting it down is also not a contradiction. Ha Rabbi Yehuda v'ha Rabbanan. It is the disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. My Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yehuda are you talking about? Ditanya. We learn in a brisa. The Rabbanan said that bringing it close to the mizbeach, that's what consecrates the first fruits. And Rabbi Yehuda says as follows in a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, v'hinachto, he says that the phrase that you should lay it down is zu tnufa. It doesn't really mean that you should put it down. It means that you should wave it. The word v'hanachto is telling me about the mitzvah of waving first fruits. The first fruits, the coin, and the owner wave it together. Ata omer zutznufa, you say it means waving, or maybe it means really putting it down. Keshu omer, when another pasuk says v'hinichu, that you should put it down near the mizbeach, near the altar, harei hanacha omer. That is telling me to put it down. Well, if I already have one pasuk telling me to put it down, why would I need a second pasuk to tell me to put it down? So hamani mekayim v'hanachto. What would I need the other verse for? The answer is zu tenufa. That's the waving. So therefore, the way he learns it is I have to put it down and I also have to wave it. Now, here's the thing. One of the rules by korban, the rules by korbanos are a little slightly different than the rules by drush in other mitzvos. When you have korbanos, anything that's written in the Torah one time means that it's a mitzvah to do that, but it's not required. Anytime it's written in the Torah twice, it means it's obligated, and if you don't do that, the sacrifice is invalid. Okay? So therefore, if the pasuk says, and you should put it down near the mizbeach one time, then it's not an obligation to do so, but that's what you're supposed to mitzvah to do so. Hence, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that it's a mitzvah to put it down next to the mizbeach, but that's not what consecrates it as first fruits. Something else does. When it walks into the mizbeach, into the Beis Hamikdash, that's what it does. Okay. Now, yes.
Does this have anything to do with the prayer we say in the morning? Habeya Bikurim.
Yes. That bikurim is that bikurim. Hapeya bikurim. These are the mitzvos, right? That you're supposed that have no shiur. They have no measurement to them, right? Okay. And bikurim has no measurement. That means that if you're a farmer and you're going to set your first fruits aside and bring them to the kohen, however many first fruits you decide to bring, that's up to you. You want to bring one basket. You want to bring a nice basket. Bring a couple of fruits. Whatever it is, there's no volume that is required. There's no required amount.
So
same one. That's the bikurim.
Thank you.
Okay. Uman Tana de Polig Ale de Rabbi Yehuda. So who's the one who's the opinion that argues Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov de Tanya, as we learn in a brisa. V'lakacha kohen atena miyadecha. The kohen should take the basket from his hand. Limed ala bikurim shetonin tenufa. That tells me from the word that he takes it from your hand tells me that the first fruits require waving. Not like Rabbi Yehuda says that it comes from the word hanacha. Comes from yadecha. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says. My time to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's proof for that? Also yad mishlamim. He learns a gzera shava from the korban shlamim, from the peace offering. Ksiv hacha, it says here, v'lakacha kohen atena miyadecha. Here the kohen is supposed to take the basket of first fruits from the hand of the person who's bringing it. Uksiv, and the pasuk says, yadav tziviyena el ishe Hashem. His hand should bring it to the fire of Hashem. Makan kohen. So just like when it comes to the shlamim, right? The kohen is involved. So af lahalan kohen. So sorry, just like by the shlamim, we're talking about a kohen. So too, this waving has to be done by a kohen. Mal lahalan balim, just like the first fruits, the owner is the one that's bringing it. Afkan balim, also by the shlamim, it has to be the owner. So therefore, what does it tell you? Hakate said, how are you supposed to do that? Meiniach kohen yodov tachas yidei balim umenif. The owner is holding his sacrifice or his basket of first fruits. The kohen comes along and puts his hands underneath his hands, and they wave it together. They go up and down together, so that their hands are on top of each other, and they both wave it together. That is how the waving is done.
So it says the Gemara now demonstrates that Rav Yehuda and the rabbis disagree.
Right.
Whether the placement of Bikurim before the altar is
required. Because here's what happens now.
So
right? What happens now is, we're going to always follow the majority. Well, always. We're going to usually follow the majority. So we're going to the rabbis. Yeah. So what happens is that according to the Rabbanan, right, the word hanacha is not needed for waving. Therefore, the word hanacha is written twice. Well, what does the word hanacha being used twice mean? It means that it's ma'akiv, it means it's required. And if it's required, that means that what consecrates the bikurim? Putting it down near the mizbeach. Whereas the other opinion, that's why we had two different Rabbi Yochanans, one is Rabbanan, one is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't need to be put down near the mizbeach in order to become consecrated. And according to the Rabbanan, it has to be put down near the mizbeach to be consecrated. Okay. Amar Rava. Rava says, last line, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and then Rabbi Yitzchak. Bikurim, Yud Testament Aleph. Bikurim. Me'emasai mechayven aleihem. At what point is a non-Kohen liable for eating them? So, Mishigiru Pnei Habayis. Once they see the opening of the Beis HaMikdash. Keman, so who's that like? Ki Haitana, it's like the following opinion. The Tanya learn a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer says, Bikurim, when you come to the first fruits, Miktsasim bachutz, Miktsasim bifnim, if half of the basket is inside and half of the basket is outside, Shebachutz harehein kechulin, the part of your basket which is outside, all those fruits are just plain regular fruits. You can eat them.
Just like what we learned with the tree and the branches.
That's right, exactly like that. L'chol divreihem, as far as for any halachas are concerned. Shebifnim, the ones that are inside the Beis HaMikdash, harein kehektish l'chol divreihem. They are holy for all practical purposes. Okay, so that's how that works. Amar Rav Sheshis. Rav Sheshis says, Bikurim hanacha ma'keves bahen. Rav Sheshis is of the opinion that the first fruits, it is a requirement, right now that you've got your first fruits, you've only fulfilled your mitzvah, as we said, from the fact that from the time you put it down by the mizbeach. Kriya, but reading the psukim, ein ma'keves bahen. Reading the psukim is not required. Keman, so who's that like? Ki hai tana, it's like the Tana we learn as follows in a brisa. The Tanya. Rabbi Yossi Omer Rabbi Yossi says, Shosha Devarim Mishum Shlosha Zakenim. Three things were stated in the name of three elders. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Rabbi Yishmael says, Yocho Yale Oda Meiser Sheni Bizman Hazeb Yerushalayim V'Yochlenu. You might think that a person could bring Meiser Sheni nowadays to Yerushalayim and eat it. V'Dinhu. And there would be a logical reason for that. Bechor Ton Havas Makom Umaiser shenitan havas makom. When it comes to a firstborn animal, it needs to be brought to a place, and so too Meiser Sheni needs to be brought to Yerushalayim to eat it. Ma bechor eno ela bifnei habayis. So just like the firstborn animal, right, has to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash, af Meiser eno ela bifnei habayis. So too that you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of eating a Meiser Sheni until it's brought to Yerushalayim during the times of a Beis Hamikdash. Ma lebechor shekain tu'unas matan damim ve'imurim legab mizbeach. So he says, yeah, but how do you compare the two? When it comes to a firstborn, it's a sacrifice. Of course you need a Beis Hamikdash because you need a Mizbeach. You need to be able to bring it as a sacrifice. So Bikurim Yochichu, the first fruits will prove it to you. Because Malabi Bikurim, because they are not a sacrifice. There's no blood to sprinkle, and nevertheless, you need a Beis Hamikdash there in order to be able to bring your first fruits. Yeah, but Malabi Kurim Shekain to Unim Hanacha, but the first fruits need to be placed down next to the Mizbeach. And so, therefore, you need a Mizbeach there too. Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, "Ve'achaltu lifnei Hashem Elokecha," you are going to eat it before Hashem. Makish maser libechor. This pasuk is going to compare and make connected the maser, the tithe, to the firstborn animal. Ma bechor eno ela lifnei habayis, just like the firstborn animal, even though it's not, you can't say that it can't learn it from a kal v'chomer, you're going to learn it from this hekesh. A firstborn animal can only be brought as a sacrifice during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Af maser eno ela lifnei habayis. So too, the tithe is only going to be able to be brought into Yerushalayim and eaten during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, it's important to note, right, that the fact that it's consecrated, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember and how to learn the Gemara, this is a circumstance where the animal was born when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. Hence, it became holy and sanctified to the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed before they were able to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, and hence they were not able to sacrifice and actually use it. Same thing when it comes to this Meiser Sheni. It was separated when there was a Beis Hamikdash, and so therefore it's now obligated to be eaten in Yerushalayim. But now they went to Yerushalayim, there's no Beis Hamikdash. So therefore it's a very interesting Gemara, remembering the time that these Amorim are living in was really right around the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So they were literally asking these questions, like what happens, like people were sitting there, setting up their Meiser Sheni to bring to Yerushalayim next year, and they showed up and found out they had no Beis Hamikdash.
It's not considered Kodesh. He says it's not considered Kodesh yet. The ones that require Zrika on the like we said that the Kohen didn't even have to eat it. Any
Bechor is Kodesh Mirachem. Right? It's born. It's considered holy as soon as it's born.
Oh, but okay, but if it was korbanos, that would have been fine to be.
Well, you could, if you designate something nowadays as a korban, you're in trouble. Right? You can.
No, but
if I physically designate something as a korban, it becomes a korban.
Right, but what's so interesting is the argument
you can't bring it, but you can designate it. That's why you have to be careful.
That's why you have you as a Kohen.
But when you're at the Pesach Seder, right? You say matzah zu al shumma, and we hold up the matzah marar zu al shumma, but you don't say Pesach zu, right? You say Pesach al shumma, and you don't hold up the shank bone. Why? Because you don't want to say Pesach zu. This is my korban Pesach, and hence designate it as a korban Pesach, making it hektish, and now you have a problem.
So I can't have basar sliya, right? You can't have it. But wait, I'm confused about something. Because we said before a korban literally doesn't take on kodesh until until the blood is sprinkled.
Correct.
And so even if it was,
but not a bechor. We didn't say that about a bechor.
No.
Right, we said about those other korbanos.
Right, but all the other korbanos.
And as far as that is, even a bechor, we said about eating it. Right, we were not allowed to eat it. It didn't affect a kapara until the blood was sprinkled. We didn't say it wasn't hektish until it was eaten.
I thought we did.
No, we said it wasn't. It didn't make a kapara. It wasn't mechaper.
Oh, right, it wasn't mechaper.
Right, and therefore the zar wasn't in violation because the zar's prohibition starts when it becomes a valid korban.
But I thought only kohanim could eat hektish.
That's right. No, kohanim can only eat a kodesh korban, a valid kosher korban.
Okay, so anybody can eat hektish.
No, nobody can eat hektish. I mean, anybody can. Okay, eating hektish, right?
I don't mean it. Yeah, but I'm trying to.
A person can bring a korban shlamim for himself,
right? And
he can eat that hektish,
right?
Right? It's his korban shlamim,
right?
Okay. People can eat hektish. That's not the issue. Isn't the eating the hektish parts, right? The issue that we had discussed before was that it doesn't become a korban that you can eat until after you sprinkle the blood.
Right.
Something can be declared hektish at any point, You could set aside an animal and say, this is my animal for my sacrifice. That just means it's going to be used as a sacrifice.
Right.
You can't eat it yet. It's not shechted.
Right.
You didn't take the blood out. You didn't salt it.
Right.
You didn't sprinkle any blood, right? It's still hektish.
Feels like.
Okay? It's still slaughtered. It's still hektish.
Right.
That, don't confuse hektish for a kodesh korban.
Right. But
Those are
I'm
two
saying
different
once
things.
everything's done besides the zrika, every yid could still eat it because it's not become a kapara.
No, you can't eat it, but you're not in violation of zar eating a korban.
Right. You're not in violation
Of that prohibition.
Other.
Right, for that prohibition.
Right.
Okay, now, the im isa. Now, if you're going to tell me, so then leifruch, then you should ask the following question: Malabi kurim shekain to'an in kriya. What would be the problem of bringing the first fruits? You should tell me the reason why you couldn't bring the first fruits. The base meat is destroyed, and you can't. These fruits would need to have the psukim read, v'hanocha, and be put, and then they would also need to be laid down by the mizbeach. Why does he only say they need to be laid down by the mizbeach? What about the kriya? What about the reading part? That means Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that holds that reading is not critical. Some Rav Ashi says nehid ikuva leka. He says, because he's not of the opinion, he says, even according to the other opinion, that doesn't hold it's required mitzvah mileka, isn't it still a mitzvah? So therefore, velema mitzvah velefruch. So why doesn't he say that you're supposed to bring the korban and put it down by the mizbeach and read it to get the mitzvah? Because okay, fine, it's not required, but he should just mention it. Ela amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, "Kevan deika bikure hager deboi lemeimar asher nishba Hashem lavosenu v'lo matzi amar lo psikole." So what happens is the reason why he leaves out the reading is because converts, when they bring their bikurim, they don't recite these paragraphs. Why? Because one of the phrases in the paragraphs that you read is that he brought me to the land that he promised to give to my forefathers. And a convert can't say that he gave to my forefathers. Therefore, when a convert brings his bikurim, he doesn't recite the psukim. Hence, since the bringing of the bikurim and reading the psukim is not universal, when Rabbi Eliezer is talking about his requirement to bring the first fruits during the time that the Beis Hamikdash doesn't exist, he doesn't even address the issue about reading the psukim because it's not a universal requirement. Okay, so that's why. Now, Velihader Dina. So, okay, you're going to tell me that I'm going to take a look at my. I can't learn it from Bikurim, and I cannot learn it from Meiser Shane. What was the other one? Bechor and my Bikurim. So why don't Vitesi b'me'atzad? So you're going to tell me that each one has a unique characteristic to it. Well, why don't I learn it from a logical deduction from the two? Because I can say both when it comes to Bechor and Mizbeach, both of them have to do with the Mizbeach. So even though they're not the same, but they both have an element of the sacrifices to them. So I guess we got to stop here, right? We'll stop here at 9:31. Okay.
Go ahead.